showing up on a rainy night, but it's a good thing. It's not snowing, at least not today. I'm Jim Heaney. I'm editor of Investigative Post. We're here to talk about a Bills Stadium. Do they need one? If so, where do you put it? And what, if any, damage should taxpayers be in for to help them build it? I want to recognize our sponsors, Burton Hardy and Lukasik, a law firm, who's our presenting sponsor, M&T Bank Foundation, Talking Leads Books, Schroeder, my good friend from the Buffalo News, formerly Rick Schroeder, has a financial investment firm, Schroeder, Braxton & Vogt. Media partners are WGRZ Channel 2 and Art Voice, and while he's not a specific sponsor in this, I'd like to recognize Paul Buchleck and Tri Distributing, who's been a very generous supporter of ours almost since the beginning. I'm not sure if in certain social circles you want that knowing, Paul.
They're making you do it.
What's he got on you, Paul? That's the question. That's what I want to investigate.
So what I'd like to do is have each of our panelists introduce themselves briefly, and then I'm going to throw questions at them. We'll go for about 45 minutes, and then open the floor for conversation and questions. So hope to get you out of here a little bit after 7 o'clock. Let's start with the good-looking man on my immediate right, Don Esmond, who I sat next to at the news since before I had gray hair. So a long time.
That goes for me too. What do you want to know?
Just 30 seconds or less. Who the hell are you? Okay.
Okay. I just stumbled in. I don't know what the hell this is all about. Yeah, I've been the Metro columnist at the news for about 20 years. I was in sports before that for about 10 years. Went to school at SUNY Stony Brook. Lived in Buffalo 33, 34 years. Work semi-retired now. Live in Elmwood Village. Have an investment property on the west side that we just bought. That's sort of the new endeavor for my wife and I. So that's about it.
I think Don just told us he's a snowboarder. Is that what he told us?
You read between the lines, Jim.
Yeah, okay. All right, Bill?
My name is Bill Barton. I'm an architect by profession, a business developer, military veteran, and like Don, I've lived in Buffalo now for about 34 years since I came to UB, and met a woman there and got married and settled down. So I made Buffalo my home. So,
all right, George.
George Hasiotis. I've been involved in a new stadium exploration since about 2008 with a private investment group, and I've lived here for 37 years. Been in private business, been involved in government, politics, and community affairs. That whole time, I've worked a lot outside of town as well on public affairs and government relations projects. And also worked closely with a major design firm that specializes in professional sports and entertainment facilities around the world, and designed the last couple of major ones. And worked closely with them on looking at the Central Terminal and more recently at another site in Buffalo. I'm here to speak on the subject of the academic view of this, how you do it, why you do it, is it worth doing, where it might be, and what are the chances of success, and how do you pay for it? So these will be my own personal comments and opinions, and won't be about pitching a proposal or representing a business group.
All right, very good. All right, I want to start out, the format's going to be, I'm going to throw out a question. Anybody who wants to bite?
Can everybody hear us? I don't know. Can you hear us back there? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Three basic questions that I want to take separately. Do the Bills need a new stadium? If so, what are the pros and cons of different locations? And thirdly, if a new stadium is to be built, what role, if any, should taxpayers have in helping to fund it? And George, because you really rolled up your sleeves and dived in terms of the project you proposed on the Outer Harbor, why don't you kind of start out the discussion talking a little bit from your perspective? Do the Bills need a new facility?
Well, I think the answer to that is absolutely yes, because there are a lot of pressures on the franchise from above and financially. The old facility is really kind of been written off already. It won't be revitalized or used after the end of this current extension. And the mandate has come down to Buffalo just as it had to Minneapolis and Oakland and other cities, that you either create a next generation stadium. There's a new paradigm model that the commissioner has been telling people, and told Vic Carucci in answer to this direct question. Vic Carucci asked him back on January 30th at his annual address, and I was there, Pat Freeman was there, others were there. Rich just said, look, you absolutely need it, and it's going to be led by the new owner, and it has to be a next generation stadium. And the same answer applied to Oakland and San Diego, and it's a proprietary product. So the question is whether the community thinks it's worth it, and how you do it in a way, as you alluded to mitigate the cost to the public.
Now let me jump in and ask you a follow-up question on that. What's the NFL going to do if Terry Pegula in Buffalo says no? I mean, would they really try and take the franchise away from Buffalo?
Well, yeah, they do that. They do it because they own it. The final arbiter is the NFL. The prime mover is the franchise owner. But the NFL has told owners, you got to get out of there because we're all losing money. But let me just say, with a new owner who's just kind of getting to know the ropes and the finances, he's already invested $2 billion in this community, and he knows he's never going to make money unless he changes the formula. So I think that's what he and his operatives are working on, which is how do we turn this around, how do we create something? Because what the NFL is telling you, just like the NBA, is if you invest in a new facility, it can't just be football because you're not going to make enough money. So work collectively with the community, with the investment community, get private financing, and create a product which enhances the NFL brand and enhances the brand of Buffalo, and do it in a way that you can show us we're all going to make money. Because if we don't make money, no one's going to want it. It's not going to work for anyone.
All right, Don's chomping at the bit here. Don, I think you have a different perspective.
Start out with your question. I mean, it's kind of like the whole premise that the NFL is going to dictate to Buffalo what it needs to do is, I think, flawed to begin with. First of all, I think we as a community are in the strongest position in terms of not getting pressured into building a new stadium than as we have been for at least 20 years, because a couple things have happened. Number one, as we all know, Wilson was in his 90s. Everybody knew he was going to go sooner rather than later. So there's a lot of anxiety. Somebody buys the team. They're not from Buffalo. It's like, oh shit, how are we going to keep the team here? We better build a new stadium to try and entice this person to keep the team in little old Buffalo. Well, what happened to our advantage is that, yeah, there was a billionaire with a hometown heart who emerged. I mean, nobody had heard of this guy 5 years ago, who emerged from seemingly out of nowhere, bought the team. Not only did he buy the team, he paid 100% cash for it. It wasn't like he put, okay, I'm putting down $700 million, and I'm going to take out essentially a mortgage for the other $700 million, which would put more pressure to essentially develop more revenue sources because he's got a mortgage to pay. Okay? This guy paid total cash. He's got no debt. He's got no mortgage. So, essentially, even Ralph Wilson at the current stadium was making $35 million a year. Okay? And for the bulk of that money that NFL owners make comes from the shared revenue from broadcast rights, not from the stadium. So essentially, we have a perfectly good stadium. It's got a structural shelf life of at least another 30 to 35 years. We've just put $130 million into it, including $95 million of taxpayer dollars. So there's absolutely no reason. We are in the best business. We don't have to be suckers for the NFL. They can't dictate to us, the 32 owners want to put even more money into their billionaires' pockets and squeeze more money out of Buffalo. we're in a position to just say no, because we don't have to. We've got a stadium on it. It's perfectly fine, and you know what? It's built in the right place, because what they did with these stadiums, essentially 355 days of the year, they're vacant, they're empty, and they're surrounded by vast acreage of parking. So essentially, you're creating this economic dead zone, and that's why these things were built in rural, suburban, rural areas.
We're off on location.
Okay, let's catch up.
All right. Bill, you've been involved in some projects in other locales. Talk to me a little bit about those projects and what lessons there are to be learned from Buffalo in terms of we have two polar opposite perspectives here. Where do you fall?
Well, like Don, like George, like a lot of people in their professions, as an architect, one of the things you got to do is listen, ask questions. You gain an awful lot by listening. And my 13 years as Bird Air, local specialty contractor of roofs, people have heard about the company. I worked in business development for them. And one of the markets I focused on was sports facilities, convention centers, other public assembly venues in which to build a roof over these buildings. And in my discussions from the early stages of the project with the owner, with the architect, with the engineer, with the contractor, I would ask questions, why are you doing what you want to do? Why this material? Why this process? And over time, I would understand why, how business decisions are made that shape programmatic decisions, which shape building design. And you understand why maybe a canopy might work better than a roof, than a full roof. I've worked on stadiums in the United States and overseas, and got to know the people who build these things very well. I think ultimately, it's good we're having these community discussions, but I think ultimately it's going to be a business decision that the schools make. They have their business model. They haven't shared with the community, but in concert with the league and the other owned franchise owners, the Pagools at the end of the day are going to make a decision on whether to remain the route, fix it up, or build a new stadium.
Do you feel that the NFL, based on your experience with other facilities, the NFL is going to exert undue influence or extreme influence to get something new built, or do you think the Pagoolas and the community might have a little bit of a freer hand?
It's a subtle pressure, but over time, as Terry and Kim Pagoola ingratiate themselves with their fellow franchise owners, they'll understand pressures that are driving the league in ways that we all can't back. But those economic pressures are out there, and it's not just economic pressures. That George mentioned the next generation paradigm. There's a movement in current stadiums, not just here in the United States but around the world, to design stadiums for the future that don't look like the stadiums that we're used to. And right now we're familiar with the route that's been there since 1973. It's used 10 days a year. It's essentially 305 days a year. The new stadiums in the future are going to be used for much more than that. They're going to be used for 250, 300 days a year. They're going to be sports and entertainment centers which drive people into a city. Don mentioned that when the route was built, the idea back at that time, in the early 70s, was to build in suburban areas, rural areas. Much like the decision was made to put UB Amherst out where UB Amherst is, instead of downtown Buffalo. Over the years, that thinking has changed, as thinking does throughout time. And as we've seen what's been going on in Buffalo the last few years, there's a movement to return to the city. So I think it's natural that you look at what other cities are doing, and they're not building where they used to be in the country, for the most part, in some exceptions. They're returning to the city centers. And one of the leading sports architects recently at South by Southwest had a presentation called the New Cathedral, the sports stadium, the New Cathedral. And he was trying to draw a parallel to cathedrals and coliseums as being kind of city centers where people congregated for various events. And he sees that as kind of a parallel going forward for future events.
All right. Now, George, why don't you expand a little bit on the definition of what phrase you use, next generation, or what's different about what's getting built now and getting planned to be built as opposed to what folks are used to?
Well, I think that's the important first step in understanding, and that's the right question. You know, I think Don is referring to the old generation stadium that we all understand. It's used limited. It was a state-of-the-art for the 60s. Well, it was a 60s generation design. It was built in the 70s. But the problem now is these things are so expensive that you're going to have to spend at least $500 to $600 million just for a bad stadium that's open air. That's not going to be accepted by the NFL. The NFL wants the next stadium to be the next best stadium. It wants it to be Super Bowl grade. But the NFL, as well as professional baseball and basketball, understand that brand of that particular sport has to expand to be more than just football for a facility to be attractive to taxpayers and to private investors and to the league itself.
So what kind of bells and whistles are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about a closed stadium. It doesn't have to be retractable roof. I mean, retractable roof adds another $150 million or so. But it has to be a multi-use, multi-purpose, multi-day, and that's why we've worked closely with the Strong Museum, and I just wanted to recognize the Vice President of the Strong, Scott Everly, is here. He lives here in Buffalo. You have to create the kind of excitement that goes beyond just one event, because Indianapolis shows us that football is only about 50% of the revenue. So it's everything else. It's soccer, it's college basketball, it's college football. It's getting the kind of media content, because most of the money, I mean, Don mentioned TV revenue, but that's not enough anymore. What the NFL will share in the next generation stadium is revenue from every activity in that facility, which means you can do a college bowl game, which means you'll create other content, which means NCAA Final Four, like the Dallas Stadium got, which means, like Indianapolis, 2 Super Bowls, not just one, and it just goes on down the line. So you're generating something with 100, 200 events a year, which is creating a new brand and a new image for Buffalo. So we're not talking about a stadium anymore. We're talking about something which creates energy, creates an enhanced brand for professional sports, but also for the community. And in the meantime, if you look at the example of Indianapolis and some of these other stadiums utilizing private and matching funding from the NFL G funds and the franchises, you're generating 10+ thousand jobs, high-paying living scale wage jobs, plus you're generating additional ancillary
10,000 permanent jobs?
construction jobs
Construction.
for the 7 to 8 years that you're building out. But Indianapolis has shown tens of thousands of permanent, part-time, and regional jobs that are created. And when you have blockbuster events like 2 commitments for Super Bowls and NCAA Final Four, and you bring in soccer, which the Vikings are doing, and the Yankees are getting involved in professional soccer, you're creating all this other additional income. So we're not really talking about the next generation stadium being the old football stadium.
Let me throw this out to anybody, because you mentioned Indianapolis is kind of comparable size-wise, but they've also really worked hard over the years to really build themselves into an athletic destination in terms of recreational. A lot of the other places you mentioned, New York, some other places, it's just a different scale. If the goal is to build a stadium that can attract 150, 250 events a year, does Buffalo have the population, the corporate base, to support that level of activity? And Don, why don't I ask you?
Well, I mean, it's a couple things. Number one, one of the things that really irks me a little bit about this new stadium NFL discussion is people who are drinking the NFL Kool-Aid. The NFL is an exclusive billionaires club. Okay, what they want to do is squeeze as much money as possible from every market. When I hear things like, well, the NFL needs to make more money, it's like, are you insane? The NFL is making money hand over fist. Okay, Ralph Wilson in our little old stadium out in Orchard Park was making $35 million a year. This is not a pauper's club. Okay, number one. Number two, we are the 5th, 4th, 3rd, whatever it is, most poverty-stricken city in America. Number 3, it's not a region that's growing. Erie County's population has dropped 30,000 since the year 2000. I mean, all this pie-in-the-sky stuff sounds good. Oh, yeah, we'll make it 250 days a year. With what? We don't have major college basketball. We don't have, we don't have a baseball team. We don't have, what do you do? I mean, the Rolling Stones only come by once every 10 years or so. I mean, it's just like, it's nonsense. It's ridiculous. You move a convention center there, and essentially, I mean, our downtown is just now recovering. And a lot of the infrastructure of that downtown, hotels, bars, restaurants, is built around that current convention center. You take that convention center out of there and move it somewhere else, and, the whole thing collapses. And I mean, we still got, Statler Towers that's, 18 floors empty. AM&A's maybe after 20 years may get something in it. I mean, this stuff is nonsense. I mean, it really, I just think it really is. We don't need a stadium. We already have one. It's a perfectly fine one. And the whole thing of the NFL, well, you've got to change your model because, it's the 21st century. You know what? We're in a position, as they said when I opened up, to say screw you to them. Because, they don't have leverage over us. We have a hometown owner, and he paid full cash for this team, so he doesn't have to pay off any debt. Now, the other question is, if he wants to drink the Kool-Aid and says, yeah, I want a new stadium, then the discussion is how much you're going to try and extract from the public, and that's a different question.
Bill?
Well, we do have a major collegiate basketball and football program. The UB men's basketball team went to the NCAA.
For the first time in 30 years.
But
It's a mid-major program. Bill, I was in sports for 10 years.
I know.
What are you trying to tell me?
I'm not trying to educate you. I'm just trying to clarify points.
I'm trying to educate you.
We
If
just
you
trying
think of major college basketball, that's 1,000. Okay? They finally put 6,000 people in that
Well,
arena. White.
let's not debate whether UB has a major college program. I made the point, I made my point, let's move on. The point is, you drive by UB's facilities, and they're not, UB's talking about putting money into new sports facilities, money they don't have. They don't have any money. They're trying to break away from Student Central. Albany's not giving UB any money, but UB wants to grow and expand their athletic program. We're in a position to offer them a place to call home, their soccer team, their football team. They want to host any other special events. We're in a position to kind of help them with a new facility. But
Bill, they don't fill the facility they have now. It's a 15,000, 20,000 seat football stadium, and they don't fill that. So you're advocating spending up to $1 billion with hundreds of millions of dollars of public funds to basically build a football stadium for a college team that can't fill the place well enough.
I'm not here to debate UB's athletics program. You made your point, I made my point. Let's move on from that. That's a decision UB has to make, and we have to make as a community as a whole. And as George is talking about, private investors. This was talked about as a new Buffalo Bills stadium. What the group here is talking about is a multi-purpose stadium, not a single-dimension stadium that we've used to for the last 40-some-odd years. This is a multi-purpose sports and entertainment center. Scott Eppley represents the Strong Museum in Rochester. Scott, how many people does the Strong draw a year? 700,000 people a year?
Just shy of 6.
Just shy of 600,000 people a year. And they're talking about building a sports facility, a museum, in conjunction with the stadium here.
Let me just respond to one thing. That I actually joined the Strong National Museum of Play. It wasn't called that way back then. 25 years ago yesterday. And when I went there, it was really on the skids. It was in kind of the shape that Don talks about, with fewer than 70,000 visitors. And I came from Buffalo. Looked like the best opportunity in North America to make an impression. So we learned how to do the heavy lifting, and over time we built from 70,000 to almost 10 times that.
Privately financed.
Privately financed over those years by offering a succession of revolutions that appeal to more and more people. The last one being the incarnation of the National Museum of Play. Well, this is when George called us and laid out this plan, talked about the potential for a site at an international gateway, and 22 million people go back and forth across. It's the 5th largest mega region in North America. If we can attract 600,000 people in a small market, Rochester, to a museum, it's not a children's museum, by the way, then what could you do at an international gateway on the doorstep of a multi-purpose, multi-day, year-round venue like a stadium? So the Georges Group intrigued us with this possibility, and invited us to conceive a North American Museum of Sport and Culture on the lines, an interactive museum on the lines of the Strong Museum in Rochester. And we were pleased to do that and pleased to come along for the ride.
George, let me ask you, how would you fill, what kind of events, who would be the major either tenants or activities that would fill this? I'm sure you've done a lot of market research on this.
Yeah.
But how do you fill the place?
Well, it's the same question that Don raises, that, you know, Buffalo is diminishing, how do you justify? And I think you heard one answer to that. The Strong in a venue like this is projected to have over 1 million paid visits a year. Now, right now, the Strong has more visits than the Buffalo Bills do. The question here is we're already spending, we're up to $27 million a year in local taxpayer subsidy. It's not just the capital money that we've put in over the last 40 years, which is astronomical, but we went from $17 million before the 10-year lease extension to $27 million today.
Just to clarify that.
We're invested in this.
The county is subsidizing
Yeah.
the
We are invested in terms of game day. I mean, they pay $800,000 a year in rent, but that's a net negative, really, because they get over $1 million per game, per home game. So we're up to, just in operating subsidy, $27 million a day. The thing is, how long are we going to keep putting money into something that's a loser for us? It's not good. It would be better to shut it down and say to the NFL, get out of here, because we'd be saving significant money. We'd still have long-term debt that we're paying. The issue here is, why don't we agree to do a study that we can bring in private financing and turn a profit, so that instead of us subsidizing, we can quantify and show that the taxpayers will get money, the investors will get money, everyone will make money. Those events are based on soccer, bringing in soccer, and don't forget, we're talking about building something out over 8 years. No one's going to snap their fingers and say, oh, we're going to change the formula. It's going to take 7 to 8 years to build a new complex, which is multifaceted, multi-revenue. It's entertainment, it's concerts, it's college. We've talked to UB football. They can play there. And imagine the rebranding of Buffalo to see Buffalo playing in a Super Bowl state-of-the-art complex and not have to spend another $20 or $30 million in fixing their stadium that they would get from the taxpayers. We've talked to sponsors. We know we've got over $1 billion in private investment potentially to bring in. We know that Rogers Communication is interested in the content derived. We could have something, for example, something as wild as the Rogers College Bowl game, in addition to everyday events, which is lacrosse, which is high school stuff, which is programming in conjunction with the North American Museum of Sports. So we've created multiple anchors and multiple opportunities.
All right, let me move on to that's a good segue into how do you pay for it. And I think the question, and I'll frame it. I'll frame it a little bit. I did a piece within the last year on the city of Buffalo has a backlog of capital projects that exceed $600 million. Every library, every park, every community center in this town needs money. And so there, and if Mark Poloncarz was here, he'd talk about how many miles of roads and how many bridges are in need of capital improvements. So when you talk about whether or not we should be building it, I think the question, part of it is on who's done. So the question, and let me throw briefly to George and get reaction to the other two. Can this be built without a significant hit to the taxpayer?
Look, I agree with Don. If it can't be built without a significant hit to taxpayers, it should not be built. I agree absolutely. And I think the test is, if you put together your best proposal, you can have a competition of ideas from different sources and see which one meets the best return on investment for the private investor and the taxpayer.
Now, let me clarify, when you say not much money, is that excluding or including public infrastructure?
The way I see this is public infrastructure. It's a brownfield site. That's one of the sites that's the prime site for this. Do it under the Brownfield Economic Development Act. You're talking about at least a dozen different federal and state budgets spread over 8 years. We have to be realistic. That money is going to be spent anyway. So if you say the ticket for the public infrastructure side cost of this is $400 to $600 million,
Is that a reasonable?
I think that's reasonable. I think that's
And what's the
broken
cost
out
of the stadium, then?
billion.
$1 billion
Which
in addition?
we can cover.
All right, so you're talking about
$1 billion
total
plus.
cost of $1.5 billion.
And if you can't do it, if you can't get it privately financed and you can't get everybody to sign on to it, don't build it.
So you're talking about
But it doesn't
about $1
cost
billion
anything.
private and roughly $500 million public in terms of
Infrastructure, which they're going to do anyway, because they're talking about the Skyway, they're talking about bridges, and they've got brownfield remediation, and they don't say this to the public, and it's not covered by the Buffalo News. It's a brownfield site that falls under the State and Federal Brownfield Opportunity Act. You can't put housing there because the DEC has already determined that. So why are we wasting our time talking about housing on the Outer Harbor, for example? It's a brownfield opportunity project, and that's what they're going to pop at you years down the line when it's too late.
You better not tell that to Reverend Joy. I'll tell you.
Well, you try some, because he won't talk to you.
Won't talk to Dan either. Dan, say hello. And boss. Bill, is that $500 million in public money? Is that something the community ought to be forming up for?
Well, I think it's going to be the community to make the decision. I mean, my personal opinion is we're going to be, like George says, we're going to be spending upwards of some amounts on that end. I mean, whether it's power authority money, whether it's tax money from the state, it's public money, nonetheless, on getting access to the Outer Harbor and water and sewage and electricity and everything else that makes up the public infrastructure. At the end of the day, the cost of stadium is, what George alluded to, $1 billion is probably accurate for what stadiums are going for these days. And you built a route for $25 million back in 1973. Well, $25 million today barely covers your soft costs. Pay your architects and engineers and contractors. But to get the level that sports owners are trying to get to these days, that's the kind of money you're looking at. In Minneapolis, the price tag right now is running about $1 billion. In Atlanta, the new Atlanta Stadium, they're replacing the Georgia Dome. The Georgia Dome was built in 1993, so it's 21 years old, 22 years old. And it's going to be demolished when the new Atlanta Stadium gets built. The new Atlanta Stadium is running 1.4, and that's going to be a multi-purpose, multi-use, multi-source of finance and pay it off. In that case, in both Minneapolis and Atlanta, the owners of the teams are coughing up roughly 2/3 the money to pay for the stadium.
For the stadium facility.
Stadium facility.
So what we're seeing in other markets is public's picking up the infrastructure in a portion of the stadium.
I don't think in any city you're not going to find, you can't escape that. I think that's part of any business equation that the sports owner and the public sector negotiate, which is not much. I mean, I don't think you can escape that at all. But Jerry Jones in Dallas forked over probably half the cost of AT&T Stadium. The Colts in Indianapolis, not as much, but certainly in Minneapolis and Atlanta, the owners of the Falcons and Vikings are contributing upwards of about 2/3, I think even probably close to 3/4 of the overall stadium cost.
All right, Don, I suspect you have an opinion on this.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, just to pick up on what Bill was saying, I mean, it's interesting because the guy who's in St. Louis now and wants to build a stadium in L.A., he's going to pay for that thing out of pocket. He's talking about paying 100% out of pocket for the owners. Now, and that's what I'm really curious about with the Pegulas. Now, George, I don't know if you have any relationship with the Pegulas, but obviously it's their team now, and as you mentioned before, I think they're going to be a driving force in determining whether or not there's a new stadium. Yeah. If Terry Pegula and Tim Pegula wake up tomorrow morning and say, and they may have already woken up yesterday morning, and said this, and basically say, we want a new stadium, and we're willing to, then the next question is, okay, how, what X amount of dollars are you willing to put on the table? And now here's a guy who basically laid out $1.4 billion, which is probably more than he needed to buy the team fully cash. So we don't know. He may be willing to lay out 75–80% of the stadium cost. And I agree. I think with these things, the community, almost always picks up the infrastructure cost.
Well, let me ask you, because you've obviously got some strong opinions on this. Do you think it would be, reasonable if Pegula built the stadium? Would it be reasonable for the public to pick up as much as $500 million in infrastructure, given all the other unmet capital needs that this community has?
Doesn't that depend on the return on investment?
Well, I think you're getting
Right now,
another
we're
issue of
spending money one way.
right, what's coming back to the
Yeah.
community and so on. And again, I hate to be skeptical, right down the line here, but I love the Strong Museum. My kids went there all the time. It's one of the best museums in the country, and I'm not just saying that because when my kids were small, we visited various museums across the country, and it's a great spot. But we have to deal with the reality of we're already building a children's museum at Canalside. So it's like, do we need or want two children's museums?
It's not a children's museum. Sorry.
It's not like
Rochester West.
Okay, so sports and memory, again, with all these things down the line, I want to change the subject, but with all these things down the line, we can put lacrosse in there, we can put soccer in there. I'm sorry, but lacrosse and soccer are not big draws in this community. Let's be realistic. We can put we can wish hope and wishful thinking that UB football is going to draw 50,000 people at some point in time, and that hasn't happened. And they've been Division I for a long time. Basketball teams have been Division I for a long time, and this is the first time they made the NCAAs in God knows how many years. They are what they are. And given the constraints, and you mentioned this, Bill, given the constraints of SUNY, where essentially there's 4 major state university centers. And if Buffalo gets something, well, Albany, Binghamton, and Stony Brook are going to want those same things. So they don't have that autonomy to essentially build on their own. And that's, personally, I think that's unfortunate because they have the desire.
Well, you'd be certainly trying to get that on top.
Right, and build on their own. So the question is, how's that going to happen? You've got to deal with the state legislature, and of course now that Shelley Silver's gone, everything's perfect now.
All right, let me move on to, let's assume for a minute there's going to be a stadium bid. Let's put aside the debate and say, all right, they're going to build a stadium. Question becomes, where do you put it? And a lot of the coverage in the paper is focused on downtown, 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 and downtown. I'd be interested in each of your takes. Now, George, obviously you've got a proposal for the Outer Harbor, but I'm sure you did a lot of research trying to figure out where to put the thing. So I kind of like to go down the line. What makes sense, and what location makes the most sense, and why? Or is there a location that just makes horrible sense? And I'll frame it this way. Downtown is tight quarters. Stadiums are big footprints. So if it is a downtown stadium, how do you, one, make it work logistically, and two, how do you do it in a way that does not gut all the business and hotel infrastructure that's already there, that the locations they're talking about now, for the most part, would be a blow to downtown restaurant, at least I think would be a blow to downtown restaurants and to a lesser degree hotels. But from your perspective, what makes sense or doesn't make sense in terms of the location?
Well, there are 2 key factors. One is siting, those factors that you listed. Is there enough space, the footprint, the neighborhood? How does it work with the rest of the urban economy? That's factor 1. Factor 2 is what's acceptable to the main tenant. It's a commercial development. It's like a mall. It's not a football stadium. It's a commercial, mixed-use, multifaceted development. You need a huge footprint. So that's the first thing we did in 2007, 2008. We worked with the city. We had a land option from the Central Terminal Foundation, and we worked closely for 2 years with the Central Terminal Foundation because we were hoping to catch the high-speed rail link, tie that in. We had CSX Railroad on board with us. So we had a lot of good pieces together, but then we brought in, through the help of Bird Air, we brought in two of the major design and sports firms. One was HKS of Dallas, the other was Populous. Populous has done work here. They're working for Pagula, and they did the renovation work on the rail. And we spent a couple of days with each team, and we went through the Central Terminal, and we looked at the footprint, and we talked to the city about taking additional land. It just wasn't enough. 60 acres, 65 acres is not enough land. But beyond that, the NFL doesn't want to be in just any neighborhood. So the last thing that's ever going to happen when you talk about a list of places, last thing that's ever going to happen is that politicians are going to tell your main tenant where they're going to put their business. And that's why the guy from St. Louis is not going to stay in St. Louis. The governor says, oh, we're going to put a great waterfront stadium out there for you. I said, you know what, it's my business. I'm not going to make money the way you want it, the way you're going to design it. So you have to follow those requirements. And throughout Western New York, whether it's Lackawanna, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, or the country, whether it's the the old West Seneca Mall site, which I'm very familiar with, and the owner of that site, there's only one prime site that's proximity to the central business district, half-mile from light rail, has 400 shovel-ready acres. Less than 200 would be used for the footprint and facilities of the structure. The other 200 would be used for public, accessibly park and waterfront access. It would be cleaned up under the terms of the Brownfield Opportunity Act. Niagara Falls doesn't work. I mean, I've talked to the people who own that parcel. I've talked to the city officials, and that was always a kind of a straw dog. So,
Well, what do you think about the locations discussed downtown? I mean, obviously you favor the waterfront.
Look,
What are the problems?
the city put out a list last March or April and circulated it confidentially to some interests and to the governor's people. And the top of the list was keep Ralph Wilson Stadium out there or adjacent to it. The second site was Outer Harbor, 400 shovel-ready acres, and then it went down. But the next couple of sites were so deficient in terms of acreage, footprint, and the complexity of consolidating those parcels because you had 16, 22 owners. You've got developers trying to manipulate this thing. You know, Carl Palladino owns big pieces. Howard Zemsky owns big pieces. Simonelli wants to control the construction project.
No.
We got the Buffalo News, you know, Stan Lipsey, you know, working with his close friends, telling his reporters to, let's play it this way, or go look at that, and go look at the other thing. This is kind of classic.
I got to interject. I don't know. Stan Lipsey doesn't come down and tell. First of all, Stan Lipsey doesn't work at the news anymore.
No, but I was in a reporter's office in another bureau, and two reporters were in there one day when somebody with a familiar voice called, and I got confirmation from a reporter to do a story a certain way. And you know,
You worked at the news.
There's a group of guys here.
How does this sound to you? You worked at the news for 25 years.
I will. I'm going to take a middle ground here. I'll point out that Stan is retired. I'll also point out that Stan, depending on how weak he thought the reporter was not above trying to elbow.
I could buy that. I certainly buy that. I'm not. You know.
It's not a matter. I think.
Folks like Don and I didn't get those
I
calls.
just wanted to see.
But other
I
people
think the firewalls, you know, pretty much stay up. And if they didn't, people like you would have been pissed not just pissed
Well,
alone.
he was the union president. He was.
Yeah.
And he was singing a different story when he was over there fighting the battle.
Yeah,
well, no, I'm saying it was not beneath Stan Lipsey to attempt to interfere in coverage. But I
know the reporter.
I mean, Stan's gone.
I know a lot of those reporters, and I do respect them. And I
So
know
what
the pressure.
I think the bottom line of what you're saying though is the objective analysis placed the downtown locations at a distinct disadvantage to some other locations.
To that, but you see they're coming full circle now. Because what you're talking about is downtown locations.
Yeah.
That's the question.
All right, Bill, you've seen a lot of stadiums put up in probably different settings. Based on your knowledge, what makes sense for a location here?
Well, I know the guys at AECom, which produced the stadium report that was released by the news in January. Used to be the old Ellerby Beckett firm that designed First Niagara Center 15 some odd years ago. Of all the sites mentioned, of the 3 sites mentioned downtown, Ralph was mentioned the 4th site. All 3 of the downtown sites, as George was alluding to, are incredibly complex to pull off. Just putting a stadium down, let alone any kind of ancillary development, which would have to be done. If you're going to build a new stadium, it's not just going to be building what you have for Ralph. You're going to be building what the Patriots have at Patriot Place in Boston. You've got ancillary development, you've got restaurants, you've got museums, you've got retail, you've got things where people go to more than just 10 days a year. No one's talked about what's going to happen to the Commodore Perry apartments.
Yeah, that's been a kind of curious mission.
That is just like kind of swept from the rug. It's like, well, they're old, decrepit, no one lives there anymore. Well, I'm sorry, a lot of people live there. A lot of people call that home. And all the talk about, well, that's a viable site, did somebody ask the residents there, is that a viable site? So I think that needs to be factored in the discussion too. It hasn't been thus far. I'd like to hope that it does if this discussion of the downside sites moves forward. You've got Pierce Arrow Museum. The news report the other day that the owner is looking to expand that at the same time that his property might be taken over by eminent domain. So I think any of the 3 sites downtown are incredibly complex to pull off because of all the issues with too many parcels, Commodore Perry projects, existing viable businesses that want to grow and expand just where they are right now. You talk about Chef's Restaurant, may have to be torn down. Where would you go? So it's not an easy proposition to do, and every city approaches it differently. Some places there are vast acreages of parking lots that are owned by one owner. There's not multiple parcels like we have in any 3 sites here in Buffalo. But a lot of these stadiums that are being built right now as we speak, and especially in Minneapolis, they're being built with parkland around it. So it's not just a stadium with a parking lot, it's actually some green space.
Are most new facilities going up in urban rather than suburban or rural areas?
Yes. And in the case of Minneapolis, the Minnesota Stadium, as we call it, is being built right next door, a little bit on the footprint of the old Metrodome. The Metrodome is gone, it's torn down. But a little bit of the old Metrodome footprint is being occupied by the new stadium there. In Atlanta, they're building the new Atlanta Stadium right next door to the Georgia Dome. So in those 2 cases, they're being built downtown. Indianapolis is built downtown. AT&T Stadium is built in Arlington, Texas, right next door to Texas Stadium, the ballpark where the Rangers play, and right next door to Six Flags.
That's more of a suburban.
It's more of a suburban, but it's right in the middle of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. If you've been down there, it's not really rural. It's pretty heavily suburban. So I'm hard-pressed to find any location that's being used that's kind of what Orchard Park was back in 1973.
Don?
Yeah, I mean, the downtown stadium is not, I mean, I know that's been kind of the wet dream for a lot of people for many years, but it's not something that I've really ever, it just seems to me, I mean, George and Bill mentioned it before, I mean, the footprint that you need, the sprawling, the parking around it, this, monolithic structure, it just strikes me as anti-urban. A point made by a number of people after the site committee report came out was that you build a stadium in a couple of these right-off cobblestone district sites, you're going to cut off the first ward from downtown. There's a lot of issues with that. So
Cut off Larkinville from downtown.
Cut off Larkinville from downtown.
There's a casino there, so it's a non-starter for the league.
No, all right.
Yeah.
How long do you think it is before they legalize sporting betting?
Well, when they go to Las Vegas, then you yeah.
They want that
Yeah,
one fine
they do.
too.
They do.
Pete Rose is trying to get his band. He's still fighting that battle.
All right. Well, why don't I open it to the floor for I would ask for questions, not speeches. I've run enough of these things now. If I don't say that, then we'll get fourscore 7 years ago. Tom?
Haven't we had variations of this conversation over and over again in West New York? Pilot Field was supposed to be an economic driver, FNC was supposed to be an economic driver, the convention center, all these facilities did empty. More than they're open, and more than they're doing anything. You're also talking about one of the most depressed economic cities in the country. So how are we going to build this mega entity 200 or 300 times a night, a year?
Well, if you don't build it, but do the study. Don't stand back and say, well, I've already decided that it can't be done. Bring in the best talent that has an interest. You know, they do RFPs all the time. I think we were not an RFP when we were an unsolicited, and we got a good reaction at first till they realized that they wouldn't have total control of it, and they were concerned about...
They being...
They, yeah, those guys.
All right, so I think what I hear you saying is that there has not been a full-blown...
We offered over $500,000 just to do $5 million in due diligence studies, traffic feasibility, and the NFTA said, no, we won't take your money, because the leader of that organization decided that it's not something he wanted to do. He hadn't discussed it with the board.
And who was the leader?
There was a chairman, I don't recall his name.
Is it the current chairman?
It was when the current chairman took over.
Answer your question. Well, the answer to your question would be Howard Zimmerman, right?
That's right.
All right,
That's
okay.
right.
I'm just trying to help the conversation out.
Well, I think the other issue that bears commenting in relation to your question is, with these sort of mega facilities where it's like, okay, it's not just going to be the 10 times a year that they play a football game there. I think we have to be careful about confusing economic generation with just merely displacing what we've already got. You put a convention center into this new facility, then you're going to, turn the current convention center into an empty shell. You put the UB football game, let's play UB football down there. What happens to the stadium that's already out there? It's not generating something that's going to be a new economic generator. You're just taking one, the checkers.
Are you describing the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus?
Well. And you know what? I'm as jacked up about anybody as the revitalization of some Buffalo neighborhoods and people coming back downtown and so on and so forth. But when you look at it realistically, essentially it's reverse migration. A lot of people that went to the suburbs over the last 50 years, some of those empty nesters are coming back. People in their 20s and 30s are deciding that the city is cool, so they're not moving to the suburbs. I mean, our regional piece of the pie, our population is pretty much stagnant. There's not new people moving in.
Mr. Edmonds, sir, what would you propose in its place? If you say the Ralph is all right, and there are a group of investors who want to bring us into the 21st century, and you don't necessarily agree with that, what would you propose in its place?
Well, I don't think, I think this community has a list of needs that are as long as, the cumulative arms of everybody in this room. So I think that, to some degree, it's kind of folly to look at something that we already have that works perfectly well, that, people tailgate at, that is in a fine spot, that just got $130 million of renovation, and that is structurally good for another 35 years. Why are we looking at that and saying, well, we need a new one? Why? It's like my car is 6 years old and it runs perfectly well, just because, Chevrolet comes out with a new model and says, you got to buy this. That doesn't mean that I got to buy it. I mean, there's everything from roads, bridges, CPS workers, and, even, if we got that kind of money to spend, let's incentivize some new business. I mean, this the Solar City thing, obviously is a question of how much are we subsidizing each of these jobs for. But I'd rather see that when you have an economic generator than something, a playpen for billionaires.
And, Mr. Edwards, you say that you feel that the current stadium is good. From my understanding, the
stadium is leaking, it's falling apart. So, but you say that you think that it's structured properly.
The county, this is not me, I'm not an engineer. The county has come out and said that structurally, this stadium shelf life is good for another 30 to 35 years.
Well, I know.
That's Mark Poloncarz, the county executive, that's not me.
Right. I know
Okay, and
people-
we just put $130 million.
I know people in the media that's out there doing game time, and they see the leakage in the bathroom, in the press room, there's cables running all over the place. It's a barn.
The $130 million that was spent last year on the Ralph, a lot of it went into a paint job. A tremendous amount of white paint, black paint was spent painting the stadium. We pulled out very good stainless steel kitchen equipment that was installed during the last renovations about 10, 12 years ago. And that only gets used about 10 days a year. Almost brand new stainless steel kitchen equipment was pulled out as part of the $130 million renovation to put in new stainless steel kitchen equipment. So we didn't address the major, being an architect, I've worked with engineers all the time, I've seen some of the conditions, structural conditions with the concrete of the Ralph, and there are some concerns. It's not as bad as the Coliseum, but the Coliseum's 2,000 years old, you expect that. But you don't expect concrete that's 40 years old to be falling apart too. And for air, I remember I was contacted by, I think it was John Lafreda many, many years ago, or someone on John Lafreda's staff. He's the vice president, was at the time, vice president of operations of the building. And he wanted me to come out and see how Bird Air could help trap the melting snow and the urine and the beer that was migrating through the concrete stands and falling on people down below. And he wanted to use fabric to try to collect that. He's saying, well, if you've got that kind of
I was
problem,
going to have dinner after this.
yeah, no more. But if you've got that kind of problem, having a kind of tray below to catch that is not going to solve the problem. But that was, Jim, I want to guess that was probably 14 years ago. And I don't think the $130 million renovation last year addressed that problem. It addressed the paint-up job, it addressed the new kitchen equipment, new commissary, it addressed the Bill's Team store, some new entrances, and then certainly some Wi-Fi upgrades and a new jumbotron. But it didn't get at the core structural issues that I
So
think
cosmetics rather than...
more cosmetics, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
next.
You talk about we need a next generation stadium, but as Don has been pointed out, we also need a next generation electrical grid and transportation system. We have a lot of needs in this area, and so I think we need to prioritize those and figure out what we're going to do. If a new stadium needs to be built, and the Pagulas want to do that, then that's good. The question then is where to put it. And I agree that if you put it in the city, wherever you put it, you end up with miles and acres of parking. So the city turns into a parking desert. If you put it on the Outer Harbor, which is a unique natural setting, it turns into a parking desert. We've already got parking, a nice location out in Orchard Park. Whatever we do, it seems to me, we should put it there and build a light rail out to that location. And now you got a parking ride. So those parking lots would be used every day instead of 10 times a year. So I guess I'd like to get a response to those thoughts. It just seems to me wherever we put it, wherever we do, it should be where it's at now. We got the parking, build a light rail out to it, and I kind of think we have a stadium that needs to build a new one.
Let me take a first crack at that. Not that I have an opinion. The first problem I see with that is if we don't want to spend money on a facility that we're concerned isn't going to be used often enough, how expensive is a light rail system that we can pretty much guarantee isn't going to be used enough?
Well, we use every day for park and ride.
Park and ride for what?
From the south town to the city.
Right, but I mean, NSTA has identified places, kind of their dream routes based on population and so on and so forth. And if they're going to do a major expansion of Metro Rail, I think they're looking at, heading out up into Amherst or out to the airport. I think, that's, if we're going to expand Metro Rail to a large degree, I think that would kind of be where it's more likely to happen. George?
Well, we looked at light rail and mass transit in both sites, whether it was the Outer Harbor or Central Terminal, and the The objective was really to extend the system to the airport, so it rationalized the system, it did a loop, and then ultimately talk about getting it to Niagara Falls and linking to rail in Canada. These are 20 and 30-year projects. But the real problem is we're still stuck with a $27 million a year annual operating subsidy. Whatever add-on you do now to enhance the route out there just becomes more of an annual operating drain on the taxpayer. What we're trying to do, and what I'm arguing, $7 or $30 or $40 million a year anymore. And why not get the study done? Why not agree to let people study it and propose it? And they'll be stuck with whether they lose money or not. That land on the outer harbor will always be public land. It will never, unlike these condominiums and garden apartments that are proposed, it will be a 99-year or a 50-year land lease. The land will always remain public. It'll be cleaned up. It'll be made into an economic engine, or else it won't be built. I mean, if the studies show, and if the NFL, the major tenant, says, no, we don't want to do it, it won't happen. But the insurance is that you've got Wall Street and you've got the NFL, the main tenant, who would say to you, it's going to work, we'll sign on to it, and they'll invest at least $500 million in matching funding. So it's not that hard to get to $1 billion+ in private financing on a project like this, if it's going to work. If it isn't going to work, you'll know within the first 9 to 12 months of doing that due diligence. That's when you get your answer. So I would think, unlike some of the answers from some of the appointed officials who control that land, you can get that kind of input paid for privately and get your answers and then move on from there.
I think one of the takeaways I've gotten from these comments, if I'm hearing you right, is that the kind of due diligence in studies, objective studies that ought to be done if there's going to be a decision made on $1 billion to $1.5 billion worth of spending, simply has not been done to date.
Well,
your effort notwithstanding, but from a public perspective.
Well, no, a significant money has been spent by the Canal Corporation and other public entities, local and state, but it goes sideways. We spent over $1 million in the last year looking at the outer harbor and a vision for the outer harbor. We've got transportation studies going on, but they're not constructive and they're not reality-based.
Whole fight back, or at least let the bill go.
Well, I think the whole premise is flawed. The NFL is not, we have a local owner, we have a viable franchise that has been here for 50-something years. We have a, perfectly functional stadium. The NFL, given all those parameters, the NFL is not going to step in and say, well, since you're not going to build a new stadium, we're going to move your team to LA. I mean, there'd be open mutiny. I mean, that's never going to happen. It's never happened in the past. It won't happen again. I mean, the NFL is essentially the consortium of owners. There's no sort of, guy behind the curtain who's, the NFL. No, so I mean, we're in, the NFL is not going to move this franchise if we don't build a new stadium.
George, you have a different opinion?
No, the NFL does take, they give you a number of warnings and indications, and Goodell's already done that in Buffalo. He's said it a number of times.
No, can you cite an example when they actually moved the team, or is everybody always
Minneapolis, Minnesota was given 1 year, 2 years. Oakland, the same. The franchise made that statement to the city. Oakland was pretty close, and they struggled to try to, they had a site. The developer was a little deficient, so Oakland's looking at going to LA. San Diego has been struggling with the city for almost a decade. They're going to move. And St. Louis is going to move based on the franchise interest.
Yeah, but moves have always been made because the owners basically precipitated the move.
No, the NFL told Minneapolis.
If the NFL comes to Buffalo and says, if you don't build a new stadium, we're moving the team out of Buffalo, I'll iron your shirt for the next
Roger Goodell.
All right, back there?
It's not going to happen.
They've retrofitted stadiums before, and the comparison from Buffalo to Indianapolis is ridiculous, because I just looked it up. Buffalo is like the 73rd largest city in the country. Indianapolis is like the 12th. Plus, they have the Indianapolis Speedway, and they also have the NCAA.
That's how they bring in a lot of outside money.
Okay, Jim,
wait. This gentleman had his hand up for a while.
Okay, well, but I think the simple answer is if you do the study and you get sign-off from private money, the market, the NFL, then you know it's going to happen. It's not something you or I can decide. We don't have those qualifications.
All right, my question is, this is to Don. Regardless of which way this is going to go, you're a reporter, you're always in search of knowledge. Did I assume that as a reporter?
I'm always what?
In search of knowledge, finding out the facts, right?
No, he's a columnist, I'm a reporter.
So you're always in search of knowledge so that you can find out the facts and deliver them. Well, the thing that bothers me the most about this whole controversy back and forth, this whole thing about stadium, no stadium, where it should be built, not built, I think, because people do read your article, why don't you be the one to lead and say, let the due diligence happen on the waterfront. Let the Greater Buffalo Sports Complex give the NFPA money and do the study, and let's see what happens. Because it's in search of knowledge. Let's have people that are a hell of a lot smarter than us all get together, go through, do all the research, getting everything done, put it all on the table, and say, here it is. And then we can make a decision from there. Why don't you be the one? That's my question to you. Why don't you be the one to say, why don't we do this?
Lead the way, Don.
If you're asking me if I think that an objective entity should come in and study this and say, hey, this makes sense for this community, or it doesn't make sense for this community, I don't have a problem.
All right, well, we're going to pay for that. The Greater Buffalo, they want to pay for that. They want to pay for that. So let's let them pay for it. No taxpayer money. Let's let them pay for it. Let's just see what happens.
So, do you have any? Yeah, I don't know the way. Whatever entity wants to pay for this, I'm the last person that stands in the way. Go for it.
Well, the Greater Buffalo Sports Complex said that they would pay for the study to do that. And
what's stopping them then?
Well, the thing is, the pressure from what I gather, the pressure from the NFPA not allowing them to do it. Somebody like you could make it happen.
I'm not quite understanding.
It was documented in the Buffalo News. There was
Well, George, you know that's Lipsy just telling you.
Yeah, that's
right.
The attorney sent a letter to the NFPA offering a large sum just for spending another $4 million or $5 million. And the public agency, the leader said no, and that's been passed on to the Canal Corporation. Dan brought up the question earlier. They don't want to engage on this because they want complete control as a public authority.
All right, I will take.
I'm just not understanding why is it dependent on the NFPA groups?
Well, at the time the land was controlled by the NFPA.
This is before it's transferred to the Erie Canal Harbor.
Right.
So the owner of the land that
And so you were asking.
$5,000 to was the NFPA.
Mixed public. At the time, the NFPA was on a path for more mixed public-private partnerships to divest itself of assets and resources.
And then there was like a 6-month contingency basis, some sort of control or
exclusive land option
for the land. That was how it worked.
Right.
And they didn't want to do that.
No, they didn't want to take the money with no strings attached to pay for a couple of buses.
Okay, but why did you need control of the land for that amount of time? Why not just
do the study? Well, we're not going to do the study with no prospect of being able to go to the NFL and the franchise and say, we've got a great proposal. Because once you get sign-off by the franchise and the NFL, you know that the project is bankable. Once you can collateralize it as part of the financing plan, once you have land control, you can go to the bank and collateralize it. And like the example in L.A., they got a commitment from Farmers Insurance for sponsorship for how much? $400 million without even having anything in the ground. It was for that team. So it's complicated, but it's kind of easy. Why would a public agency that needs money from the taxpayer turn down potentially $1 million if they negotiated right, with no strings attached, just for us to spend another $4 million to provide all these answers, and they would decide.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank all three of you. This was we've done a number of events. I think this was the most. Kate, I think you would agree this was the most spirited.
They're viewed in a sense like that.
Yeah, nobody took a swing at anybody else, so that's good too.
That's for a future event.
Yeah.
Jim,
Yeah, actually, speaking of future events,
I read some comments online, various sites leading up to tonight's event, and some of the comments were like, another stadium event? I get used to it. Over the next 7, 8, 9 years, as the league kind of winds down, this is going to happen more and more.
yeah.
So the community, has got to be ready for it.
Well, the reason why we did this is...
Whether you build a new stadium or you fix something up, no matter what it is, there's going to be a continuing debate.
Well, what we're trying to do with events like this is get issues aired, and aired in a more candid way than they're often explored in the local media, with the exception of investigative reporting, of course. And
Unless he's retired, he's the one that, he just went over and told you guys what to do, right?
yeah, if he could. I want to mention a couple of upcoming events. Dan Telbach is going to host an event April 15th at the Theodore Roosevelt inaugural site. He's going to talk about, of all things, his coverage of Outer Harbor issues, including his report 2 weeks ago about how the Outer Harbor is a giant brownfield that needs to be remediated before you can do anything on it. And then April 29th, we have a real barn burner. It's a luncheon at Pearl Street Brewery. Phil Ramore and Larry Quinn are going to... I don't need to say... We've got ringside seats, and then we've got... No, they made me promise to keep it under control.
That should be paid for you.
Yeah. So I would, again, we've got April 15th, Dan talking about the Outer Harbor, and then on the April 29th, we'll have Ramore and Quinn, and I thank everybody for coming out. This was a really packed room and a really, really good conversation.